Coming up on the SPNN Forum, I'll be speaking with facial coding expert Dan Hill. That's next on the SPNN Forum. Welcome to the SPNN Forum. I'm John Forde. With me today is facial coding expert Dan Hill. Welcome, Dan.
Good afternoon, John.
Dan, in the 7 years I've been doing this show, you're the first person I've had on a second time. You're that good.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
But nonetheless, we'll repeat some stuff. Tell us about where you grew up.
I grew up mostly in Northfield, but also Roseville, and a little touch in Italy, which is really important to my being a facial coder. I was reverse immigration, moved there when I was 6 years old, got off the boat, went to Italian first grade in a fishing village, did not know the language, had to read nonverbals. Italians have a wee bit of it.
That makes perfect sense. What is facial coding?
It originated with Charles Darwin. Darwin, in his work on evolution, essentially said, why do we have emotions? What adaptive advantage do they give us? He came to realize that in our face, we best reflect and communicate our emotions. Even a person born blind emotes the same way as you or I. So let's go back to the Italy comparison. Hand gestures, which Italians are very famous for, a hand gesture that is fine in Belgium may get you killed in Sicily. There are variances by the culture, but facial expressions are so universal that a person born blind has the same expressions as you or I, and a child by 9 months of age will even have the same expressions. That's how strong the correlation is.
This is why I find your work so fascinating, because you're really plumbing the relationship between thinking and feeling.
Yes.
And the gap, because people report things like I know a large part of your work is focus groups.
Yes.
And how they maybe aren't all that accurate in their self-report.
No, people are not truth tellers. We essentially want to feel good about ourselves and attract allies, and the truth kind of gets lost in translation. And focus groups are a prime case of that with peer pressure. So yes, this is infinitely true in life. The great thing as a facial coder, it means I'm endlessly employable.
Okay. Now, was there a moment in your life when you had like an epiphany and realized, oh my goodness, facial coding is my life's work?
Yes, what happened was someone I knew at IBM sent over an article about the breakthroughs in brain science and how much we are essentially intuitive, emotional decision makers. I pretty much went, duh, but it's nice to get the scientific confirmation. But the interesting question then was, how am I going to be able to get at and quantify emotional responses? And so I started reading, and one fine morning, I came across the fact that Charles Darwin indeed came to realize what I told you. And the moment I read that, I've never taken cocaine, but this is as close as I got.
All right, it felt
because
good.
It felt really good, because this is the reason. My mom was an interior designer, and I had been an art history minor in college, so I couldn't follow the brain scans. That's not something I can do. Mm-hmm. But facial expressions are visual, and they're accessible, and this was just a natural calling. I was in love with Rembrandt by the age of 7. Rembrandt does facial expressions really well. This is like a natural calling for me. I just didn't know it at first.
Now, was there like an academic study or something like that? I mean, where do you get the quantitative aspect and the definitions?
Sure. Well, that's a good question, because obviously Darwin was dead, so we did not have too many meetings to discuss facial coding. There was a man named Paul Ekman, who's been cited by Time magazine as one of the most important influential psychologists on the planet. Paul went through with a colleague and systematically figured out which muscle movements correspond to which emotions. It's called the facial coding action system. It's now something that has been bought up in a nascent software version by Apple. Microsoft, all sorts of major companies are going after this. Viewers may not know about facial coding today, but I assure you, before the decade's out, they're going to know about facial coding. This is poised to break really big time. But what Paul did not have when I learned facial coding from him was a scoring system and norms. Mm-hmm. And so yes, you have to go through and quantify and look at each of these different reactions. Let's take anger, for instance. Really soft version of anger is I'm a little bit annoyed or perplexed. Really vicious version of anger is I'm like a dog who's had its bone taken away from me. Occasionally in political debates, you see that expression.
You do. Now, you mentioned Apple and Microsoft, but
Sure.
The big one would seem to be facial book coding.
Facebook, yes.
They are at work all over this.
They are at work on it as well. Google's at work on this. Essentially, Silicon Valley is locking down on the opportunity because, again, the breakthroughs in brain science confirm that we're emotional decision makers. So if I can use emotions to guide my behavior, to ward me away from road rage in a car, monitor you in a store. It's going to be used in employee hiring. It's already being used in politics as I've used it. There are so many opportunities and places this will go. Hopefully for good, probably in some cases not for such noble purposes, but I've tried to stay away from those.
So we did some show prep, but nonetheless, I go right off script right away. I hadn't realized what an important feature this is of like the right to privacy, because if Google can get an update on me every 15 seconds and see the patterns in my emotions, they're going to know the right time to sell.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The next versions of TVs are going to have a camera facing out at people. They're going to actually be able to monitor your reactions in real time and potentially, instead of playing the same commercial on your TV set because you didn't react to it the first 2 times, they might switch it out for a different commercial from the same company and see if that one flies for John Forde. So there are immense possibilities here. They go way beyond what I'm interested in trying to do with facial coding. But yes, the commercial and other implications for our lives are vast.
Now, what do you know about the TV series Lie to Me?
A lot.
I figured as much.
Because for one thing, Cal Lightman and Dr. Paul Ekman kind of sound a little similar. Yeah, Ekman was an advisor for the show. I've certainly watched it. The biggest downfall from the show, other than the fact, yes, it's lovely in that it advertised facial coding and people are fascinated by it, is it led some people to believe that there was a tell for lying. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
People have different patterns. Sometimes they'll show fear about lying. But some people are brazen liars, and they'll feel contempt for the person they're lying to. So I think it did the tool a little bit of a disservice in that respect. But it was wonderful for showing the fact that, yes, in a real-time situation, as I often have done in life, you can anticipate, see what's going on, know the emotion in someone, and then try to modify your behavior, or at least understand what you're dealing with.
So the tool reveals the emotion directly, but it doesn't reveal necessarily deception. It's the gap between the statement and the emotion.
In a case like that, it's what I call a say-feel gap. They said this, but they actually felt that. Or they'll say something that's really passionate, and there's no emotion at all. Nobody's home. Elvis has left the building.
Yeah.
It's just lip service. So there are those kind of disconnects. But there's another place I thought you were going to go to, which is I know the emotion, but now what's the trigger for it? What's the implication? Let's take sadness as an example. Ekman was also an advisor for the Inside Out movie by Pixar. Well, sadness is kind of the hero of that movie because it's often an emotion that's derided as just you're a sad sack, you're down and lonely. Well, there's positive versions to sadness. It can indicate that I'm a very empathetic person when I'm sad, that I notice other people in my lives and know when they need a bucking up, for instance. So sadness can have positive implications. It can have negative ones. It can just, I'm hopeless, I'm feeling isolated, I've been put down. It goes lots of places, so you have to get the context involved.
That makes perfect sense. Tell me about the projects you're involved in. You've been involved in so many interesting projects, from commerce to politics, and now a Minnesota project.
Yes, what has happened is that as I've gone through, yes, for all these years I've looked at groups of consumers in the business stuff, but the politics, I had front page coverage in the New York Times for my work in pro sports. Those kinds of assignments started to pull me into looking at individuals. In fact, I just did work for the US Olympic squad for Rio for diving, and looked at what divers were showing emotionally, how they could best interact with their coaches. Those kind of assignments made me go, I'd like to move to the individual level, and the most fun version of that is celebrities. Because we know their backstory, we can wonder about how do they really feel? What's the person behind the icon? So I did an online survey, I polled possibilities. I asked people in Minnesota who they thought were the 10 most famous and interesting Minnesotans, and that became my kickoff project to go after celebrities.
And it didn't matter if they're living or dead, because none of the interesting ones are dead. How did you select the actual photos that you were looking at?
Google Images was a good place to start.
Did you take a lot of images for each person?
Absolutely. But I also went to books in many cases. My goal was never to have less than 150 photographs that I looked at. In some cases, I probably looked at well over 300. It depended a bit whether this is someone who stayed in the public eye for a long time, like a Bob Dylan, or someone who had maybe a little bit briefer interval in the public eye. But I would look across their lives or at certain epochs of their lives that were most important to them.
Now this comes back right again to another psychological trait, psychological terminology. State or trait? When you look at, like, for example, Dylan over 50 years, did his traits change over time, or was it just mood changes that kind of repeated itself over the years?
You've actually brought up a really important distinction, because mood is something that's got a long fuse to it. We could say someone's depressed. Well, they can be depressed, but they won't necessarily show sadness on their face, because sadness needs a trigger. When an emotion really happens and has that trigger, you're talking about an interval that may be half a second, probably no more than 3 seconds in duration. It comes, it happens, and it goes away again. So that is different than, you know, a state or certainly a mood. That said, you see patterns over time. There's a wonderful comment from George Orwell. He said, by the age of 50, a man is the face he deserves. And it's true. We have muscle memory. We have signature expressions. And so the fascinating thing as I go through these photographs is you'll go, oh, I know this guy, and I know that emotion about this guy.
Do you see people who literally smile less in old age?
Dylan would be a prime
Really?
case, absolutely. And if you look at later stage Dylan, what you get primarily is anger and disgust, and the happiness is still there, but in so much smaller portions than the earlier Dylan.
Is that the price of fame?
I think in Dylan's case it is a bit, because he was such a boy genius or young man genius that the expectations were high for Dylan. And to stay at that level, and I think his own ambivalent feelings about commerce, his famous first manager, L. Grossman, apparently resembled Dylan's father and was a rather cantankerous guy. And I think that Dylan in some ways took his feelings about commerce and his feelings about his dad, and he put it all on top of Grossman, and that relationship was over very shortly.
Interesting. You ever met Dylan? You've been to one concert?
I've been to one concert of
Okay.
Dylan, yes.
Okay.
I feel like I know the guy. I played his albums constantly.
Okay.
I've certainly looked at him a lot.
And Minnesota's other famous musician, Prince.
Yes, Prince is also interesting, and it's playing out the implications for his emotional, I guess I'll say traits in this case. And I say that because he has one that's very pronounced. It's anger. Anger is an emotion about wanting to be in control of my life and wanting to make progress. So think of where he started. He is black in a state that's very heavily white. His parents divorced by the age of 7. His economic standing is not so great. And he was full of ambition. I mean, there are friends who will testify to the fact that a recording machine couldn't rewind, the tape couldn't rewind fast enough, because he wanted to hear it and then listen to it and improve on it for the next version of the song. So he was a very, very driven guy, and you don't necessarily pick that up if you look at him from famous TV interviews. He's very soft-spoken. And you go, this guy angry? But there are subtle ways in which you can give away anger. And he wanted to control his fate. The record industry and his feelings about that and his contract would be a prime case of that. But so would how he ended. Oddly enough, for a guy who so wanted to control his life, he has no will.
Yeah.
And now he's at the mercy, the estate's at the mercy of the lawyers.
He wore a lot of makeup. Did that make it harder to do facial coding?
No, the makeup would not make it harder. Botox injections.
I was going to Michael Jackson next.
Yeah.
Because he had quite a bit of face work done, and I know you put effort into coding Michael's face as well.
Yes, and what happens is the youthful Michael is a piece of cake to code, and by the time you get to the 80s, it's a different game. The expressions are much more muted, if they're even there at all. It really takes away the circumference of what's possible. So Botox injections aren't so bad because I'm looking at 43 muscles in the face, and usually those only involve a couple of placements for the injections. But plastic surgery is a whole nother ballgame.
Which is essentially putty in the face, right?
Yeah.
Or cutting. Yeah.
Cutting and tightening the skin so it loses the elasticity. And that's what makes facial coding so great in part. It's not just the universality, it's that the face is the only place in the body where the muscles attach right to the skin. It's that quick, real-time, unfiltered data. Well, plastic surgery makes it filtered data thanks to the surgeon's knife.
Yeah. Why is your work not applied to politics more? Or is it, you're not telling us?
Well, I've worked on the Mexican presidential race, and I've been a columnist and an analyst for the networks. I didn't choose historically to get involved in political races within the country because I have run a business and my clientele is, I'm sure, of both political persuasions. And you are inevitably in this very toxic political environment we have going to alienate some people. And so I did approach the Bloomberg campaign because he was running for re-election as an independent. But that bumps up against the other problem, which is that the campaigns are hastily put together in many cases. And you have consultants who are not as sophisticated as what you'll find in the corporate world because they are not consulting on campaigns with the same research focus. A lot of it's about the media buy and the positioning. And so knowing how you're doing in the polls and some basic online surveys are cheaper, quicker in a fast-moving campaign. And that tends to be what they resort to.
So those consultants are less analytical because those consulting gigs are actually almost political positions in themselves. That you get there by networking.
You get there by networking, and it's a very transitory and very fast-moving thing. Whereas if you're Procter & Gamble, your brand's been around for 100+ years. Your candidate may be around for 6 months.
I would think, though, that essentially the counter message, you'd be incredibly valuable. You know what, the face. I mean, there was a big moment when Chris Christie said about Rubio. There, he pivoted again, and Rubio's face just fell, and Christie's, I imagine, bloated bigger than it already is. But things like that would have so much power. So why aren't they hiring you?
Well, these are political appointee positions. I'm not in their inner circle. But could I add value to them? I mean, when I did the work on the Mexican presidential race, what they originally told me was that I was dead wrong, that the socialist candidate who proved a surge really wasn't a threat to them. Well, he closed the margin by 2/3 between my prognosis that he was on the rise and the candidate they were focused on was going nowhere and did go nowhere. So they came back to me, and we are talking about work for the next election cycle in Mexico. In the U.S., we'll see what happens. Those people came to me because there was a very powerful research firm that handles the account, and they saw me speak at a business conference.
What do you say to people who don't believe in facial coding?
Well, the first thing is you probably get that argument at times with people who want to think they're logical decision makers, and this whole idea that emotions rule us so much is threatening to their self-identity. So for those who like statistics and facts and numbers, Ekman did a survey. He went to experts in the field. These are scientists who specialize in emotions and in quantifying emotions. And the survey was over 250 of these specialists, and 80% of them agreed that Ekman's facial coding system, given its universality and the correspondence of the muscle movements to emotions, was correct. And think about that, 80% is awfully good. These are academics. They make their living by basically contending with each other.
Yeah.
Or to put it in a different context, think about the Supreme Court. Sure, there are some unanimous decisions. There's mostly not. The other place I would go, though, is simply to say to listeners, take any one of the expressions, actually do it yourself. You will realize you're going to feel the emotion we're talking about. For instance, anger as an emotion is essentially, I want to strike out, I want to control my life. Think of a snake coiling to strike, and then press your lips firmly together, and you discover that you feel anger by simulating anger. Likewise, if you curl your upper lip, that's a sign of disgust. It means that you're aversive, you're backing off, you think something's poisonous. I suggest the listener, viewer does that, and they're going to have that same impression.
Now, there's some research that says, happiness causes a smile, but the reverse is also true. The smile causes the happiness.
Sure. A good salesperson, I think, would practice a little bit of a smile before they get on the call because, first of all, it will probably lighten them. But there's another advantage, which is happiness is not a trivial emotion. There is good evidence to show that someone who's a happy person, reasonably happy, I'll go to that in a moment, reasonably happy person is more elastic in their thinking, more flexible, they get to superior solutions more quickly. Here's the caveat to that. Someone who's over the moon happy gets really sloppy with the details.
I think I fall in that category. I remember reading that people who are almost deliriously happy tend to consider too many alternatives. Yeah, they're highly digressive, I guess, in thinking.
And they don't hold on to things, and they get a bit oblivious. So I've been on a non-hunting safari to Botswana. One of the things you discover really quickly is when the animals are going to have fun, they're going to copulate. It's then and gone. Because if you linger in the act, well, that might be a moment that the vulture decides, you look really good.
Edible,
yeah, really edible.
Okay. Let's go back to famous Minnesotans.
Sure.
You and I have been on a show. You were on a show that I used to host, and the only other person on this list is Al Franken, who's such an interesting person because he makes your face move.
Yes, well, he enjoys what he does, and that's been true of all the different aspects of his career. But he is a satirist. By, I believe it was second grade or fourth grade, he was writing parodies of his school teachers. Imagine the horror of having Al Franken in your class. And what would a satirist tend to show as an emotion? Well, pretty naturally disgust. Because disgust means you don't really like what you're being fed, that it tastes bad, it smells bad, that you're rejecting it. And so a satirist is always looking for how do you improve on something. You're naturally a critiquer. So he shows a lot of that, and then naturally he shows a lot of joy. And joy means that that muscle around the eye relaxes and you get the twinkle in the eye because Franken has just really enjoyed himself.
Now, as you've been looking at these Minnesotans over time, can you see a pre-politics Franken and a politics Franken?
Well, he has, one thing is, it's true, it's not just Dylan. I think a number of people will actually become less happy later in life. You know, health problems might start to ensue, you know, circumstances change, the youthful buoyancy goes away. So that can be often true. I think in Franken's case, if the buoyancy is slightly less evident, although it's quite evident still, but the degree is less evident, well, he's sitting in that toxic swamp called Washington, sitting through endless hearings, and I'm sure has a sensation that nothing's getting done.
I bet it does, yeah. Other people on the list?
Schultz, because we just talked about people getting maybe a little less happy in life. He's a wonderful example.
This is Charles Schultz, not Dick Schultz, the founder of Best Buy. Charles
Yes,
Schultz,
this is
the creator
Charles
of
Schultz.
Peanuts.
Yeah, often known by his friends as Sparky.
Okay.
So I'm going to use Sparky. Sparky actually went the opposite direction. The early cartoonist was not a very happy guy. His parents had a fairly subsistence existence. His dad was a barber over on Snelling and Marshall Street, or that vicinity. I guess St. Clair.
Selby.
Selby,
Snelling and
actually.
Selby,
Yeah, Selby.
Above O'Gara's.
Yeah, above O'Gara's, exactly. The girl that he wanted to marry thought he wouldn't go anyplace in life, at least that's what her mom thought, so she turned him down. His mom died, you know, fairly early in his life, and he was very close to her. So the early Schultz did not fare terribly well and showed a lot of sadness. In fact, when he went to his class reunion, he told people, I'm that guy, I'm that cartoonist, and they didn't believe him. He actually had to draw, you know, Charlie Brown for them to accept that he wasn't the loser they expected him to be. Okay. But the later Charlie Brown is often still, conflicted in his emotions, but not the later Sparky. He's actually remarkably happy. He goes through the rest of his life creating what I would think are a bunch of simulations. So, you know, Lucy is kind of like the girl who didn't marry him, and she's got a combative personality. But I think there are elements of Schultz and all the other characters from Linus to, you know, Schroeder and so forth. And he's had the time of his life recreating his pain, but doing it joyfully.
Now, do you think he had an awareness of facial coding as a cartoonist?
I would have to think so. I mean, even just in the broad strokes, yeah, you would hope so.
You met Sam Simon on our previous show.
Yes, I did.
And Sam drew the initial, well, didn't draw the initial Bart Simpson, but he was a cartoonist and really the driving force behind The Simpsons. You taught him a great deal, didn't you?
Well,
after he was rich and famous.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was so instrumental to his success.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far. Well, I would say we were soulmates because he really appreciated the importance of emotions and how much they drive storyline, whether it's Simpsons or Cheers or anything else that he was a writer for. And then, yes, they're all visual mediums. It's TV, after all. Yeah. So taking emotions, taking storylines, and taking characters which are imbued with emotions that express in the face, yeah, he got it in a nanosecond.
We have less than 5 minutes left. Who else on the list do you think is extremely relevant here? We got Mondale and Humphrey.
Well, I would actually like to go to Judy Garland because we haven't talked about women on this show. And I think if you look at Minnesota and famous Minnesotans, there's two that we have to hold on to. One is Mary Tyler Moore. Because how can you talk about Minnesota and emotions and not mention Minnesota Nice syndrome? And so Mary Tyler Moore managed to always have that nice smile. But I've now gone through and facially coded the show, the Mary Tyler Moore show. And here's the great thing about it, is that Mary gets to a much more authentic level of happiness that's sustained by the friends in her life and the fact that she's an accomplished professional. Ted Baxter has that over the top, joyful, oblivious to the fact that he is a complete fraudulent TV man kind of happiness. So it's a wonderful contrast between the two. And Judy Garland managed to get to a very authentic happiness as well. But in her case, she doesn't have just Ted to deal with. She had a tough life.
Yeah.
Several marriages, financial pressures, health issues, and yet she retained a happiness that's quite remarkable. One of my favorite things when I was doing the research was to come across a quote that said, a producer said of Judy Garland, "There's not a mean bone in her body." And there really could have been, but there just wasn't.
Yeah. Mary Tyler Moore, Ed Asner, was he ever happy?
Yes, he was, but he was happy because he enjoyed being pugnacious.
Yeah.
You know, there's a wonderful early segment where he says to her, "You've got spunk."
Yes.
And then he says, "I hate spunk."
Yeah.
But he smiles a bit in saying it. Yeah.
Did you look at these actors outside the role? I mean, Mary Tyler Moore was a role. Well, she was the actress playing Mary Richards. Were you looking at her as an actress or just in the role?
No, when I looked at the TV shows, because I am at work on a book called Famous Faces, and I'm taking iconic figures over a 40-year, 50-year stretch here in American life. When I did the TV shows for the upcoming book, I really focused on just them in character. So sure, I went and looked at the PR photographs that were taken of the cast, but I really wanted to see the character that we would know from the show.
Gene Wilder, just completely off script, just passed away.
Yep.
Such subtlety to his face and yet such mania.
Yeah, well, the eyes go big. There's a lot of surprise. And I think that emotions are very contagious. So, you know, sometimes he liked just writing the scripts or improvising, obviously, on the set. And if you can feel that surprise, that discovery, that in the moment delight in what you're doing, that's catchy. And he threw that off.
So we got about 2 minutes left. And you can't plug the book yet, but is that what you want to finish with?
Well, I'm very excited about the book. It gives me a large...
I'm excited about the book.
It gives me just a wonderful opportunity to, in some cases, relive my childhood. I looked at All in the Family, for instance, but also to look to the millennial age. And eventually what I'm going to be able to map out is the differences that we might see emotionally, not just between men and women, but over generations. And did the expressions and what an athlete gives away when they're Muhammad Ali vary by the time they get to be a Michael Jackson and into other eras? Michael Jordan, rather. I mean, there's all sorts of ways in which I'll be enjoying turning over the Rubik's Cube of emotion before I'm done with this book.
And you're a high energy guy. So when this project's done, are you revealing what the next thing might be?
I have no idea.
You don't know.
I have no idea.
Okay, and your face won't tell us.
But
so.
I know I'm already entertaining an offer to come speak at a forum about foreign policy, because you can apply this to look at the issues that face America in terms of the foreign presidents that we have to deal with as allies or adversaries, and their personalities would probably give you some sense of how we're going to cope with them as a country.
Yeah, I just think looking at people like Putin and just so much to learn.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Putin isn't an open book; he's an open trilogy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information in Putin.
All right. We have only a few seconds left. Are you a good poker player?
Yes, I'm a very good poker player. The last time I played poker, they said, "We really enjoyed you being here, and please don't come back."
Very nice, very nice. Well, Dan, thank you for being here.
Sure.
I've been speaking with Dan Hill, facial coding expert. This is the SPNN Forum. We'll see you again next week.